I caught my wife without her wedding ring at a company party, so I announced the divorce in front of everyone there. She was desperate when she heard the shocking announcement. She wanted to run, hide in the bathroom, maybe erase the last 5 seconds of the entire room's collective memory, but it was too late. At that moment, the mask she had worn for years fell like shattered glass to the floor, in front of colleagues, friends, and family. I saw the surprise run off her face like makeup on tears. I saw the looks in our direction change from admiration to scandal. Some put their hands over their mouths. Others just looked away, embarrassed, trying to pretend they hadn't noticed. But everyone heard. Everyone was there when I ripped away, with a dry sentence, the facade of our perfect marriage. And the sickest thing is that she didn't even have the courage to hide it better. He was without his ring. Without the slightest trace of guilt, of fear, of consideration. As if it were nothing. It wasn't the absence of the ring that destroyed me. It was her look. A loose, light look, as if free from prison. And there, at that party, where everything was supposed to be celebration and conquest, I understood that, for months, maybe years, I had been the emotional clown of a show put on by her and the audience that she chose herself, the lover, the fake smiles, the hidden touches, the meetings planned between one meeting and another. I realized that, while I was working hard to keep everything standing, she had already removed the bricks from the foundation and was building a parallel life. And when my heart raced when I saw her on that dance floor, laughing freely, with a glass of champagne in her hand and a tight dress that I had never seen before, I felt my stomach turn. The bracelet I got for my birthday was there, shining, but the ring, no. It wasn't. It was as if she had removed the symbol from everything we owned as easily as you take off your shoes when you get home. People stopped when I got on the improvised stage next to the company director. I didn't ask for silence. I took it. The voice was firm, but the chest was shaking. I just wanted to thank everyone for an amazing night, and let you know I'm getting a divorce. Now. And I pointed at her. Not with your finger, but with your eyes. The entire room spun to face her. The air became thick, and for a moment I thought no one was breathing anymore. She stood up from her chair as if she had been shot. Eyes wide, lips parted, trying to formulate a sentence that didn't come. And when the speech finally came, it came thin, weak, as if it weren't hers. Please, not here, but it was gone. It was right there. That was where it all needed to end. The ironic thing is that she didn't expect to get caught. Because she was sure I would never suspect. After all, I was the man who made her coffee before meetings, who wrote notes on napkins with love phrases, who defended her competence in boardrooms full of sharks. I was the man who saw beauty even in his silence. And she knew it from the beginning. And he used it against me. Cheating isn't just about sex. Betrayal is planning. It's the coldness of sharing your soul with someone and continuing to lie next to the person who gives you their heart. And I gave. I gave everything. And she tore it up. The lover was from the company. Of course it was. I had access to the same corridors, the same corporate smiles, the same excuses for late-hour meetings. They weren't discreet, they were just counting on my blindness. And that's when I realized what hurt the most. I had become invisible to her long before I realized. She no longer looked me in the eyes like she used to. He no longer laughed at my jokes, nor did he fight with my methodical way of organizing the books on the shelf. She just tolerated it. She tolerated it until she found another mouth that made her really laugh. Another touch that reminded his body that it could still burn. And when I thought it was all just phase, routine, time, she was actually moving further away every day. After the announcement, I left. But she followed me. He ran after it as if it had all been a passing nightmare. He grabbed me by the arm and whispered through his teeth, "You can't do this to me." And that's when I laughed. I laughed because she truly believed she still had control. That she could still dictate the rules of a dirty game where only she knew the board. I turned around, looked her in the eyes and replied, "You did this to you. I just revealed it. She started to cry. That desperate cry that mixes panic with guilt. But it was too late for tears. It was too late for any attempt to rewrite history. And the most tragic thing is that, at that moment, in the midst of the breakdown, I still saw the woman I fell in love with years ago. Lost, groundless, begging for something that not even she knew how to recover. Days later, she tried to get closer. He sent messages, showed up at my door, wrote letters as if we were in a 1960s romance. He said he missed me, that he regretted it, that it had been a moment of weakness. But there was no moment there. There was a choice. She chose to lie. He chose to deceive. And the worst part, he chose this consciously, repeatedly, continuously. I was no longer the man she wanted. I was what was left until the next step. What she didn't expect, and perhaps this was her real punishment, was that I was already changing in the silence. While she cheated on me, while she smiled with him in the parking lot, while she said she would be late, without even knowing it, was moving away. On a company project, I met someone. Nothing happened between us, not then. But there was an exchange. There was conversation. There was real laughter. And when the world collapsed, she was there. Not to console me. But to simply exist. No promises. No intentions. Just presence. My ex-wife found out. Of course he found out. And he freaked out. She realized that, in the end, she was the one left alone. That, after losing everything, he tried to hold on to what little was left, and there was nothing left. The lover disappeared. Disappeared like someone who never existed. And I followed. For the first time in a long time, I followed. But there's still something she doesn't know. Something that would change the entire perspective of what happened next. Something that explains why, even after the divorce, I never exposed all the messages, the photos, the emails hidden on his computer. Something that explains why I never told our daughter the truth, and why I agreed to participate in that last meeting with her at the company, even after everything. The question that remains is, why did I choose silence? What did she really lose? And what made her beg, months later, for one last chance, knowing she would never get it? Welcome to the channel. Here, we make one thing very clear: we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories told are fictitious, but the feelings are real, because the pain of betrayal can destroy entire lives. Our goal is to show, with intensity and truth, the devastating consequences of selfish choices. Now, get ready. You are about to hear a shocking story, intense and unforgettable. Daniel has always been a man of simple convictions and solid principles. He grew up in a middle-class family, surrounded by examples of effort, honesty and loyalty. From an early age he learned that the most lasting achievements did not come from haste, but from the silent persistence of those who do everything with their hearts. He chose engineering not only because of his logical talent, but because he wanted to build things that would last, just as he wanted for his own life. When he met Laura, more than 10 years ago, he felt that, finally, something in life made absolutely sense. She was the complementary opposite of his rigidity. Communicative, elegant, charming, Laura had a contagious energy that lit up any place she went. Coming from a wealthier family, accustomed to social events and refined dinners, she had learned to move naturally between calculated smiles and well-placed words. But with Daniel, she showed a more vulnerable side, a woman who dreamed of a quiet life, away from the spotlight, or at least that's what she said. Their wedding was celebrated as an unlikely fusion of different worlds coming together in harmony. The outdoor ceremony, surrounded by close friends, was marked by the refined simplicity that defined them as a couple. The first years of marriage were of genuine complicity. While Daniel worked long hours in an urban architecture office, dedicating himself to projects that transformed entire neighborhoods, Laura immersed herself more and more in the corporate world, growing quickly within a multinational strategic consultancy. He was intelligent, shrewd, and knew how to conduct meetings with the same ease with which he charmed a room at a charity event. Contrary to what one might expect, Laura's success never made Daniel jealous. On the contrary, he was proud of her strength, her ability to conquer space in an environment where so many women were still invisible. On the weekends, when they weren't traveling, they cultivated small rituals that seemed solid and eternal: breakfast together on Saturdays, always with pancakes he made, and her ironic comments about overdoing the honey, movie nights at home, with blankets on the couch and long discussions about the end of the films, Sunday lunches where she would bring friends from work and he, even though he was more reserved, insisted on being present. They were, to everyone looking in from the outside, a model couple. They balanced their differences, and seemed to have found the perfect formula for a modern marriage. Friends often commented on how inspiring they were, how much they fit together. And that, for Laura, seemed to matter a lot. There was a quiet vanity in being seen as part of an envied relationship. She liked the idea of being admired not just as a businesswoman but also as the wife of a decent, stable man. As the years passed, Daniel felt, from time to time, a certain distance growing between them. Nothing glaring, nothing alarming. Just the kind of separation that is hidden in routines, in excessive commitments, in silences that last a little longer than before. Sometimes, when he looked at Laura distracted on her cell phone, answering emails late at night, he wondered if they still shared the same emotional space. But he soon pushed the thought away, convinced that every couple goes through phases. He never suspected anything beyond the common exhaustion of adult life. He never imagined that, behind the smiles and sweet talk, there could be bigger secrets. He cared more about pleasing her, keeping her happy, surprising her with flowers on random days, organizing homemade dinners with recipes he learned just to see her smile. Laura, in turn, loved telling her office colleagues about her husband's funny quirks. How he organized his books by color and height. How I insisted on keeping the same cup for coffee for years. How he left notes in her coat pockets during the winter. At first glance, it was easy to believe that this was all part of a solid and peaceful relationship. But, behind the scenes of her routine, Laura was transforming. Work had stopped being just a career project and had become an extension of her identity. She was now a central figure within the team, respected, admired, sought after. I participated in international forums, was invited to important events and dinners with high-ranking executives. And although many of these experiences were genuinely the result of his competence, they were also accompanied by a growing dose of vanity, a need for approval that Daniel, with his simplicity and quietness, no longer seemed to completely satisfy. The difference between the two, once charming, now began to sound like incompatibility. Daniel wanted stability, a bigger house on the outskirts of town, children, maybe a dog. Laura said it was early, that they were still building their lives, that having children would hinder their advancement at the moment. He understood, he accepted, but something inside him was uneasy. Sometimes, as he looked at her getting ready in the mirror, putting on her makeup to perfection before a corporate dinner, he wondered if she still saw herself as part of an us, or if she was already living a more individual narrative. Still, he remained there. Faithful, patient, believing that love was also made of waiting. It was common for Laura to travel alone. Congresses, events in other cities, consultancy services for large companies. Daniel didn't mind, not because of lack of interest, but because he trusted. He knew how dedicated she was to her profession and knew that those trips represented real opportunities for her growth. He himself was often the one who packed her bags, printed her boarding passes, prepared snacks for the airport. Laura, in turn, maintained a formal affection. I sent occasional messages, shared photos of sophisticated restaurants and made short video calls between schedules. When he returned, he brought expensive gifts and funny stories about his colleagues. And Daniel listened attentively, as if waiting for someone to return from an expedition into a world to which he does not belong, but of which he is proud to be a part. Between them, the affection never completely disappeared. There were still kisses, there was still touching, there was still sex, albeit more sporadic, more technical. Daniel, even feeling the subtle coldness that was emerging, continued to fight for that space. And Laura, although visibly more distant, kept up appearances with impressive skill. He had a talent for creating a perfect atmosphere on social media, with framed photos of smiles and declarations on commemorative dates that made everyone believe they were facing an unbreakable couple. Over time, their relationship began to be based more on memories than on current experiences. And this, although silent, began to erode the foundations. Daniel clung to the memories, the honeymoon in Tuscany, the first days in the small apartment with used furniture, the late nights when they cooked together laughing at any nonsense. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to move toward the future, always in a hurry, always with goals, as if the past were an anchor she needed to let go of. And then came the invitation to the company party. An elegant event, held every year to celebrate results and recognize the team's highlights. Daniel was hesitant to go, it wasn't really his thing, but Laura insisted. He said it would be important, that many leaders would be there, that it would be good for them to appear as a couple. He accepted, as he always did, for her. He chose a new suit, shaved his beard more carefully, put on perfume. I wanted to measure up. I wanted to see her shine. I wanted her to be proud to take it with her. That night, he arrived a few minutes later, stuck in traffic after an unforeseen event at work. When he entered the hall, he saw Laura in the distance. It was stunning. She wore a red dress that he had never seen before. Her hair tied up elegantly, long earrings that hung softly at the side of her neck. She was smiling, as always. Surrounded by colleagues, glasses of sparkling wine, compliments. He walked towards it, but was stopped by a colleague who asked for help locating someone. When he finally looked back at her, he saw something that chilled his spine. And at that moment, amidst the lights, toasts and laughter, something invisible broke inside him. He still didn't know what it was. I still couldn't name it. But at that moment, the story he believed he lived began to crumble, stone by stone. The night of the corporate party unfolded like one of those evenings that promised to remain intact in the memory. There was soft music in the background, elegant lights bathing the windows of the main room and an atmosphere carefully sculpted between inspiring speeches, glasses of sparkling wine and practiced applause. Laura slid her heels across the floor with a confidence that seemed part of her essence. He greeted executives, received praise for his performance and effortlessly became one of the gravitational centers of the event. Daniel, on the other hand, remained on the periphery, observing with the same mixture of admiration and distance that had accompanied him in recent months. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was a sensation that was hard to name, as if something was vibrating beneath the surface, something that had no form yet, but was slowly brewing. He had arrived later than planned, caught up in a meeting that went on longer than expected, and upon entering the room, he saw her so radiant that he felt out of place for a moment. There was something in her eyes that night, a peculiar glow, a joy that didn't seem directed at him. He walked towards her, offered her a warm smile, and she responded with a fleeting kiss on the cheek, the kind that happens when there are more people watching than feelings pushing. They exchanged quick sentences. He asked her if everything was okay, she responded yes, without stopping, dragging him towards a group of colleagues where he was soon reduced to a cordial shadow at her side. For the rest of the evening, Daniel navigated the event as another guest, fulfilling his role as polite companion. Laura disappeared into animated conversations, laughter that bounced off wine glasses, technical talks, and work confidences that left him out. He retreated to the back of the room, found a free table and sat down with a drink in his hand. From there, he looked at her. She twirled between groups, leaned into someone's ear, laughed with her head thrown back, touched a tall man's arm familiarly. It was then that Daniel noticed something strange, a small detail that stuck in his stomach without warning. Laura's left hand was bare. The alliance, always present, was not there. He leaned forward, narrowed his eyes. He confirmed. It was not a mistake in perspective. It was not a temporary oversight. The ring was missing. His heart tightened in his chest, but he tried to convince himself that there must be a logical explanation. Maybe he had taken it off to wash his hands, maybe he had forgotten it at home without realizing it. But something inside him, something very old and animal, told him no. That wasn't an accident. That what he was seeing was not coincidental. That his absence had symbolic weight. He tried not to react immediately. He walked to the bathroom, wet his face, breathed deeply and returned to the living room determined to observe without being noticed. From that moment on, Laura's every movement took on another texture. The way he leaned toward that man, the way he spoke too closely into his ear, the way he brushed his shoulder at intervals that no longer seemed casual. It was someone from the work environment, that was evident. A new face for Daniel, but one that fit too comfortably into her orbit. There was complicity, body language, a code that did not include anyone else. When the CEO's speech began, everyone turned towards the stage. Laura and her companion stood in a far corner, half covered by a column. Daniel, from a distance, watched them with attention that cut his breath. For several minutes, she stood next to the man, smiling, nodding, exchanging glances. Then, what his chest feared and his mind still refused to accept happened. She saw how the man, with astonishing naturalness, caressed Laura's lower back, and she did not move away. He didn't correct. He didn't get upset. On the contrary, she slightly leaned her body towards him, like someone responding without words to a familiar caress. Daniel felt a sharp blow in his stomach, an electric current that left him paralyzed for seconds. His first impulse was to move forward, interrupt, say something. But he held back. I didn't want to improvise. I didn't want to make a fuss without being absolutely certain of what I was seeing. But I couldn't continue pretending that nothing was happening. In the days that followed, his life became a silent theater. He kept up appearances, woke up next to her, made coffee, talked about trivial things. Laura didn't suspect anything, she didn't notice the change in his eyes, she didn't perceive the abyss that was growing between them in silence. Daniel, meanwhile, began searching for answers. She reviewed travel agendas, looked more closely at departure and return times, and noticed the names that appeared over and over again in work conversations that she casually mentioned. And there he was, the man of the party, mentioned with increasing frequency. A brilliant collaborator, according to Laura. A new consultant who had impressed management with bold ideas and a proactive attitude. Everything fit together too well. Too fast. During one of those weeks, Daniel organized a dinner at home, as he used to do in better times. She invited a couple of mutual friends, cooked throughout the afternoon, and created an intimate atmosphere, with soft music and lighted candles. I wanted to see her in another context, I wanted to observe her behavior without the pressure of the professional environment. But Laura was distant all night. He looked at his cell phone frequently, answered messages with hidden smiles, got up from the table to make urgent work calls. Daniel, from the kitchen, heard part of one of those calls. There were no names, but the tone was unmistakable. A mixture of contained laughter and complicity that you don't have with colleagues. When she returned to the table, she looked at him with distracted eyes and told him it had been a long day. He apologized, kissed her cheek and retired early to sleep. That night, Daniel did not sleep. He sat on the living room couch with the light off, looking at the window as if waiting for a sign from the universe. But there were no signs. There was only one bitter certainty that grew like mold: she was with another man. I didn't know when it had started, or how long it had lasted. I didn't know if it had been a slip or a routine. But what I did know, with heartbreaking clarity, was that I no longer had it. That somewhere along the way, Laura had crossed an invisible line and had chosen not to return. The following days became an exercise in endurance. Daniel alternated between the desire to confront her and the urge to gather more evidence. Not for revenge, but for dignity. I needed to see her admit it. He needed the words to come out of his mouth. And at the same time, something in him broke with each day that passed without a confession. Because she was still acting normally. He kept asking about her day, smiling when she arrived, making plans for the weekend. It was as if she inhabited two parallel worlds. In one, she was still his wife, in the other, he was someone else's lover. And then came the second invitation. Another corporate celebration. An awards gala where Laura would be recognized for her leadership. Daniel agreed to attend, this time with a different perspective. No longer as a proud husband, but as a silent witness to a work that was beginning to become unbearable. It was prepared with surgical precision. He chose his clothes carefully, mentally reviewed his words, his gestures. I didn't want to lose control. I wanted to have absolute control of the moment, like a surgeon before a delicate operation. The night of the event, everything was ready. The decorated room, the diffused lights, the cameras capturing smiles and toasts. Laura, splendid as always, entered on the arm of Daniel, who accompanied her with a disturbing serenity. They greeted some acquaintances, posed for photos, walked among decorated tables. She walked away at times, greeting people, mingling with executives. And then, the inevitable happened. Daniel saw her discreetly enter one of the outside gardens, a less crowded area. He followed her with measured steps. And there he was. The same man from the previous party. They were standing, too close, whispering something to each other. She laughed. He touched her face with cheeky familiarity. And it was then that Daniel saw the final gesture. A kiss. Fast. Accurate. Undeniable. The world fell on top of him with a silent crash. He didn't scream. He didn't run. He just turned around and went back to the living room. In his chest, something went off. And with that silence boiling in his blood, he made a decision. It wouldn't be that night. Not in private. Not with whispers. I would do it in front of everyone. Because she hadn't just taken away his love. He had lost his respect. And that, he thought, deserved a response to match. The time for the final speech was approaching. Laura would be called to the stage to receive her award. He already knew it. He knew when and how. The microphone was there. The auditorium full. The attentive eyes. The music lowered its volume. And as the applause called her up, he too walked forward. One of the two did not know what was about to happen. The other one had everything clear. And the worst was yet to come. Because what Daniel still didn't know was that betrayal was not the end. It was just the beginning. The moment Daniel took the microphone was one of those that freezes time. The audience, still applauding Laura's award, did not immediately understand what was about to happen. Laura, with the trophy still in her hands, smiled in confusion as she saw him take the stage. She thought he would make a statement of support, perhaps a public compliment that would put her in the spotlight, like so many other times he did behind the scenes. But Daniel didn't smile. His eyes were fixed on her, and his voice, when it came over the sound system, cut through the ambient music like a razor through the silence. He said, with calculated calm, that he wanted to congratulate all of his wife's colleagues for their brilliant work and that it was an honor to share that special evening. Then, he released the sentence that would tear the room in half, and I would also like to take this opportunity to announce, in front of everyone, that starting tomorrow, we will file an official request for divorce. The hubbub began with a second of absolute shock. Soon, the entire hall was plunged into dense unrest. Laura remained static. The color drained from his face. His expression alternated between disbelief, embarrassment and fear. The trophy slipped out of his hands and fell with a sharp crack on the marble floor, as if sealing what had just been said. He tried to react, but the words wouldn't come. People looked at her, murmuring, looking away, clutching glasses with sweaty fingers. Daniel got off the stage without waiting for a response. I knew that there was only the first part of the truth. What came next was even bigger. He left the salon through a side door, walked to the parking lot and stood there, next to the car, waiting. He knew she would follow him. And she followed. Staggering in heels, her eyes moist, her breathing uneven, she reached him with her voice broken, as if she needed to weave words together with borrowed air. He asked if he had gone crazy, if this was how he thought it was fair to resolve a marital problem, if he no longer had respect for everything they had built together. But Daniel didn't respond right away. He looked at her for long seconds, until he spoke, with a lower, almost intimate tone, filled with a pain that had been suppressed for weeks. He said that he wasn't the one who had destroyed anything, that respect had been broken when she made decisions on her own and crossed a line that he would never have crossed. Laura tried to deny it, tried to say that everything was out of context, that things were not as they seemed. But Daniel approached, took his cell phone out of his pocket, showed an image and simply said, "Is this enough context for you?" It was a clear photo, taken from the salon's balcony, where she appeared in the consultant's arms, kissing, as if the world around her didn't exist. Laura held her breath for a few seconds. Then, he lowered his eyes and whispered an almost imperceptible, "I'm sorry." But Daniel wasn't just there for that. He needed to understand. He needed her to say it in her own words, to express what he already knew. He asked how long ago, he asked how many times, he asked if she had ever thought about being honest. Laura hesitated, then began to speak, first in fragments, then in more complete sentences, as if the truth was coming out clawing at her throat. She said she didn't know when exactly it started, that things had become confusing, that she felt ignored, that she missed being seen as a woman. Daniel laughed, a dry, incredulous laugh, and asked if that was the justification she offered for destroying a 10-year-old story. She tried to touch him, but he backed away. Silence settled for a moment, and then he asked the question he had been holding on to since the night of the previous party. Why didn't she wear her ring anymore? And the answer came like a shot. Laura said she had started leaving the ring at home because her lover asked her to. That he felt uncomfortable when he saw her with the ring. That it was a symbol that reminded them all the time of what they were doing. Daniel closed his eyes. He felt the blood throbbing in his temples. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the ease with which she gave in, with which she allowed another man to dictate how she should live her life within a marriage. It was the depth of the choice, not the act itself. Laura then said that she still loved him, that didn't mean she no longer felt anything for him, that she was confused. But Daniel, this time, didn't laugh. He just stared at her, and what he said next was in a choked but firm voice. That love cannot be confused. That love is not betrayed. That those who love, even when lost, do not allow a moment of weakness to last for months. And it was there that Laura, on impulse, said the sentence that would change the course of everything. He promised me to leave the company, but he didn't. Daniel frowned. He asked what she meant by that. And then, Laura fell silent. He realized he had said more than he should have. He tried to retreat. He said it wasn't important. That it didn't matter at that moment. But it was too late. Daniel felt there was something bigger. Something that was still buried. He asked her what she meant, insisted, pressed, and she, trembling, said she couldn't tell him. Not there. Not like that. He stepped forward, eyes on hers, and repeated, "What did he promise you?" And she hesitated, swallowed hard, and finally said, "You promised that, when you got the position, you would take over for me." Daniel was silent. Time stopped again. His brain needed seconds to fit the pieces together. "Position?" he asked. And she, resigned, nodded. "He's my boss now, he was promoted 2 months ago." Daniel felt the ground slip away from beneath his feet. Everything fell into place now. The way she had been promoted months ago, the conversations about new projects, how much she seemed to know about decisions that hadn't yet been officially communicated. It wasn't just an emotional betrayal. There was an exchange of interests, a behind-the-scenes game. Laura, upon noticing his look, tried to explain herself. He said that was never why, that the involvement had come later, that he had not manipulated anything, that he had not used the situation. But his words were lost in the air. Daniel interrupted her with a gesture, turned, got into the car and drove off. Over the next few weeks, Laura tried to get in touch. He sent messages, called, showed up at his parents' house. She said she was sorry, that the other man had broken up with her right after the scandal, that she now saw everything clearly. But Daniel didn't respond. It was on another frequency. One where grief had already transformed into something else. He started going out more, going back to places he had avoided for years. And, without planning, he met an old coworker again. Someone with whom he has always had a discreet but deep connection. They started talking, drinking coffee, walking together after work. It was light, it was simple, it was honest. And there, in the midst of the pain, something unexpected was born. Something that wasn't revenge. It was a fresh start. What Laura didn't know, what no one knew, was that this new beginning had one detail. A secret that Daniel had discovered by chance, when investigating her lover's professional history. A secret that changed everything. A secret that didn't just concern love, but character, truth and power that certain people hide behind easy smiles and high positions. And he already knew how to reveal it. But I wouldn't tell her directly. Not yet. He preferred her to find out the same way he discovered the betrayal, at the most unexpected moment. At the exact moment he was about to believe that everything had calmed down. The days that followed the announcement of the divorce and the revelation of the betrayal were a strange calm for Daniel, like the silence that precedes a devastating storm. He no longer felt anger, pain, or desire for revenge. I felt something deeper and more dangerous, clarity. The clarity of someone who finally saw all the pieces on the board, of someone who no longer needed to pretend they didn't understand the rules of the game. While Laura tried in vain to get closer, looking for a truce, a conversation, any space where she could rebuild the bridge that she herself had burned, Daniel was already walking in another direction. I didn't want to talk. I wanted to close. And, above all, he wanted justice. Not to get revenge, that was too small for what she had done, but to re-establish the truth, including the truth she thought was buried. It was on a rainy afternoon, with a cloudy sky and warm air, that he met Olivia, the coworker with whom he had reconnected. The reunion between them had come about so unexpectedly that it seemed like another one of those perfect coincidences that fate allows itself to offer when everything seems lost. Olivia was sensitive, reserved, and had a calmness that contrasted with the emotional intensity he had experienced for years with Laura. In just a few weeks, she had become his safe haven, not by filling the void left by someone else, but by reminding him that it was still possible to breathe without carrying the weight of a corrupted history. Sitting in a cafe far from the center, between hot cups and knowing looks, Daniel spoke for the first time about the missing piece of the puzzle, the secret he had discovered about Laura's lover. It all started when looking for public records of transactions at the company where Laura worked, Daniel came across a complaint filed months earlier, against the then manager who would later become his ex-wife's lover. It was an internal process stifled by the organization's top management, involving manipulation of results, favoritism in contracts and the use of confidential information in negotiations with competitors. But the detail that made him delve deeper was another. There was a witness who initially took part in the complaint and later withdrew it. The signature on the document was Laura's. That changed everything. The case had been buried weeks before his promotion, and curiously, shortly after that, Laura was promoted too, without any clear criteria. It was like an exchange of favors disguised as corporate advancement. The revelation corroded Daniel from the inside out. Not only had she betrayed him emotionally, but she had also engaged in a maneuver that put her ethical integrity in question. Olivia listened carefully. He didn't interrupt, he just held his hand firmly, as if he understood not only the facts, but their impact on the soul of someone who believed for years that he lived alongside an honest woman. Daniel still didn't know how to reveal that. But he wanted it to be as public as the breakup he had suffered. I wanted Laura to experience the feeling of having her masks ripped off in front of the same people she was so keen to impress. And then he decided, he would use the company's own restructuring event, which would take place in 3 weeks, to expose everything. It would be an internal presentation, with executives present, and he knew he would have space to speak, as he had been invited to present one of the new urban requalification projects, in partnership with Laura's company. It would be the perfect moment. Over the next few weeks, he prepared meticulously. He didn't tell anyone. Not even Olivia knew the details of what he planned. He gathered documents, printed archived emails, retrieved the complaint records, made copies. I didn't want to take any risks. Everything needed to be challenge-proof. And the closer the day approached, the more serene it became. It was as if every minute spent with those papers gave him back parts of himself that had been ripped away by betrayal. It wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. And when the day arrived, he wore the most discreet suit, combed his hair with the precision of someone preparing for a duel, and entered the auditorium with the calmness of someone who knows exactly what he is going to do. The room was full. Executives, managers, board members. Laura was there too, sitting in the third row, next to the now director, her ex-lover. The two laughed discreetly, whispering as if the past had been erased with a corporate eraser. Daniel took the stage and began his performance as planned. He spoke for 20 minutes about the project, about the social impact, about the solutions applied. He won applause and praise. But at the end, before thanking him, he took a long pause. He took a deep breath. And he said that, before closing, I would like to bring to light a set of facts that, as a citizen and professional, I could no longer ignore. Silence filled the room. The eyes turned to him, curious. Daniel then took the documents out of his pocket, projected the pages of the complaint onto the screen and began to narrate with surgical precision the then manager's involvement with confidential data, favoritism in negotiations and internal manipulation. He pointed out dates, connections, email flows. And then, without hesitation, he revealed that one of the people who had been coerced into withdrawing the complaint was, at the time, a financial sector manager, Laura. The eyes turned to her with brutal rapidity. Laura's expression fell within seconds. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come out. The ex-lover also turned pale, motionless. The room plunged into indescribable tension. Daniel continued speaking. He said he was not there out of personal resentment, but because he believed that a system that covered up this type of practice needed to be challenged. He said that, as much as he had suffered personally, what was being exposed concerned everyone present. That the integrity of a company begins with the ethical choices of its leaders. When he finished, silence still reigned. Nobody knew how to react. The board asked for a break, and within minutes, the two, Laura and the director, were called to a closed meeting. Daniel left without looking back. I didn't need it anymore. The weight he had carried for months dissipated with each step. In the parking lot, he found Olivia waiting, as they had agreed. She asked if he was okay, and he just smiled, saying yes, for the first time in a long time. That same week, Laura was temporarily removed from her duties. The director went on leave, for personal reasons. Rumors began to spread. The consequences would come in waves. But Daniel was no longer in that sea. He had left the coast behind. Now he walked with new steps, alongside someone who didn't know his past, but respected every scar he carried. And it was only weeks later, on an afternoon with open skies and gentle wind, sitting with Olivia on a small balcony overlooking the park, that he finally understood that he had started again. That true love might not be made of grand gestures or fiery words, but of shared silence, holding hands without the need for explanation. And that the greatest victory was not seeing someone else fall, it was moving forward when no one else believed that this was possible. The boardroom remained silent for long minutes after the extraordinary meeting ended. A silence that weighed more than 1,000 words, where eyes avoided crossing, cell phones were not touched and breathing became short and restrained. The news of the scandal exposed by Daniel had spread quickly throughout the company's corridors. The top management, in a mix of shame and perplexity, knew that it was no longer just a matter of preserving individual reputations, but a desperate attempt to save their own institutional credibility. Laura, sitting alone in one of the inner rooms, stared at the distorted reflection of the window with emptiness in her eyes. There was no more ready-made speech, no social charm, no casual smile that could disguise what had been revealed. It was no longer just about betrayal of a husband who had loved her with patient devotion, but about the public exposure of an unethical involvement that, even though it had been covered up for months, was now unfolding into administrative proceedings and possible legal investigations. What was eating her most at that moment was not the possibility of losing her position, her bonuses, her strategic contacts, but the way she had been left naked in front of everyone, without any narrative that could save her, without any control over the situation. Outside, Daniel was not involved in the repercussions. He had already done what needed to be done. I knew that continuing in that environment would only serve to fuel interpretations, confrontations, or attempts at emotional manipulation. That's why he chose silence as his answer. He decided to let the facts speak for themselves, for the documents to take on the weight that words could no longer carry without becoming vindictive. Still, the moral dilemma gnawed at him in silence. Not out of regret, never for that, but out of the awareness that, by revealing what he knew, he had also ended up destroying parts of his own story. There was something melancholy about the fact that the woman who had once been his great love was now just a memory distorted by choices she herself had made. And yet, even after everything, a small part of him wondered if it would have been different if she had had the courage to confess, if she had chosen the truth before he discovered it. In the days that followed, Daniel allowed himself the luxury of anonymity. He walked through places where no one knew him, drank coffee in distant establishments, read books that had been stacked on the bookshelf for years. He rediscovered himself in the midst of small forgotten habits, and little by little, he felt his mind freeing itself from the emotional labyrinth in which it had become entangled. I didn't look for answers in the past, nor justifications. He simply rebuilt himself, with patience and respect for his own limits. Olivia, always by his side, did not invade the silences. He accompanied with a rare understanding, offering presence without demands, affection without weight. She understood that there were pains that could not be rushed, wounds that needed to heal in silence before seeing the light again. Meanwhile, Laura became the target of looks that were previously flattering, now full of judgment. Colleagues with whom she previously shared professional confidences now avoided mentioning her in meetings. Important phone calls stopped. The invitations disappeared. The lover, once so sure of his power within the organizational structure, no longer responded to his messages. In a matter of weeks, she went from protagonist to unwanted figure. And, even with all the eloquence that previously served as her shield, she was unable to find a narrative that would rescue her from that abyss. She tried to deny it, she tried to justify it, she tried to blame the system, but deep down she knew she had betrayed herself before she betrayed anyone else. And this betrayal, the one committed against one's own conscience, is the most difficult to forgive. On a rainy and gray Saturday morning, Laura appeared at the door of her old apartment. She was wet, disfigured, her eyes marked by insomnia. In his hands he carried a letter and a look of restrained pleading. Daniel hesitated for a few seconds, then opened the door and let her in. They sat in silence, facing each other, like two statues from a past that no longer existed. She handed him the letter, but he didn't read it right away. He said there was nothing there that he didn't already know. She replied that it was not a letter of forgiveness, but of confession. That there were things that she never managed to say, and that now she needed to get out of herself so she could continue, even alone. Daniel listened. He didn't interrupt. He let her speak. And she spoke. With tears, with a trembling voice, with long pauses. She spoke about the fears she hid, about the constant feeling of living a life that didn't represent her, about how she confused ambition with recognition, and desire with affection. He said that, in the midst of the chaos, he was always the only real anchor he had. And that she lost everything at the exact moment she allowed herself to think that he would be there forever, no matter what she did. Daniel listened in silence. There was no resentment in his eyes, no pity. Just tiredness. Tiredness of those who loved until there was no more love. When she finished, she asked if there was anything else he needed to know. Laura denied it. He said that everything that mattered was there, in that letter. He thanked her, got up, and walked her to the door. He said he sincerely hoped she would find peace, but that did not mean reconciliation. That there were limits that, once crossed, could not be erased with tears or promises. And then he let her go. No hate. No goodbye. Just a definitive silence. In the following months, Daniel dedicated himself to a new project with Olivia, a community center aimed at welcoming people in situations of emotional crisis. It was an old idea that I had always put aside due to the demands of work and married life. Now, it made sense. Now, it had purpose. Working with other people's stories helped him give perspective to his own. He discovered, in the process, that shared pain does not lessen, but transforms. And that there is a quiet beauty in the human ability to rebuild after a breakdown. Olivia, by his side, was more than just company, it was a partnership, it was true, it was a type of love that didn't need to assert itself to exist. Meanwhile, Laura, even though she was away from her old position, was trying to rebuild her professional life in another, smaller company. He carried the weight of a tarnished name, a damaged reputation, but also an uncomfortable awakening for who he really was outside of his titles and positions. For the first time, he had to deal with his own vulnerability without the protection of the masks he had cultivated for so long. And, silently, he began to understand that the true punishment did not come from social punishment, but from daily confrontation with his own reflection, one that no longer allows lies or disguises. And although their paths had separated forever, the bond between Daniel and Laura continued to exist invisibly, like the scars that remain on the skin even after healing. They had been part of each other, and now they carried marks that would tell that story forever, even if they never crossed paths again. Because some truths, when revealed, don't just end cycles, they redefine who we are, who we can be, and how far we are willing to go for what we call love. The beginning of the new phase in Daniel's life did not come like a sudden wave, but like a tide that slowly receded to reveal what had been left behind, rubble, broken objects, memories still damp from the impact of the last storm. There was no euphoria or rush, just the necessary rhythm of someone who understands that rebuilding requires more than strength, it requires patience, awareness and, above all, truth. The days took on a different color. For the first time in a long time, he could wake up without the burden of having to pretend he was okay. The mornings were simple, hot coffee, the news in the newspaper, the light coming in through the living room window. But simplicity was now a choice, not an absence. And, in this everyday scenario, space emerged for something new, still tenuous, but real. Olivia became part of this new construction with the lightness of someone who doesn't invade, just stays. She did not require statements or future projects. He knew how to listen and, even more, he knew when not to speak. On nights when Daniel seemed immersed in distant thoughts, she would just sit next to him, let the silence do its work and time take care of the rest. They didn't talk every day, and that was comfortable. Each meeting was constructed naturally, based on affinity and respect, not out of necessity or lack. In a world accustomed to noisy loves, what was born between them was almost silent, and for that very reason, true. It was on a cloudy Sunday that Daniel received an unexpected call. The voice on the other end was familiar but hesitant. It was Raphael, a longtime friend, someone I had met in college, but with whom I had lost contact in recent years. After briefly exchanging pleasantries, Raphael got straight to the point. He said he needed to talk in person, that there was something that needed to be said and that it couldn't be resolved over the phone. Daniel hesitated. I didn't usually make room for the past, much less for stories that seemed to come back abruptly. But something in the tone of his former friend's voice made him accept it. They arranged a meeting for the end of the afternoon in a discreet bar in the city center, a place where, in ancient times, they had discussed projects, loves, failures and dreams that now seemed to belong to another life. Raphael arrived on time, visibly uneasy. He looked different, his hair was now gray, his face was more closed, but there was still that look in him of someone who observes everything with more depth than he shows. After greetings, he ordered a beer, took a deep breath and began. He said he was at the same company that Daniel had reported months earlier, but that he was now part of an internal audit team called in after the scandal. He said that many documents had been re-evaluated, and that, during this process, some new information came to light, among them, a report written by Laura weeks before the official complaint was withdrawn. Daniel listened carefully, without interrupting. Raphael continued. He said that, according to the report, Laura had been the first to identify the irregularities. That she tried to alert the board, and that, as a result, she was under strong pressure to remain silent. That the involvement with the director began after the veiled threat that, if she persisted, she would be fired and discredited. That she, out of fear, kept silent. And that, during that period, she began to become emotionally involved with him, in a confusing cycle between submission and dependence. Daniel stood still. The information arrived as a new piece that forced the entire puzzle to be reorganized. He asked if that changed what she had done to him. Raphael said no, but maybe it would explain why she acted that way. He also said that Laura had recently sent a new dossier to the internal committee, admitting the omission and reporting the coercion process. That he had asked not to have his name publicly exposed, but wanted to make amends as much as he could. Daniel thanked him for the information, but did not comment further. After a few minutes, he said he needed to think, to digest. Raphael understood. They said goodbye with a long handshake, the kind that ends a cycle without saying much. In the following days, Daniel started to look at the last few months with a different type of lens. It wasn't about absolving anyone, but about accepting that even wrong choices can be born from pain that others don't see. He thought of Laura, not with anger, but with the melancholy of someone who finally understands what they couldn't understand when it still mattered. That didn't reopen the door between them, but it changed the way he would carry this story from now on. Resentment gave way to something more mature, more honest, the awareness that each person acts with the tools they have, and that, sometimes, loving someone also means freeing them from our own narrative about them. A few weeks later, Olivia invited Daniel to a photography exhibition. It was a small event, with local artists, and he accepted. During his visit, among urban images and intimate portraits, he came across a photograph that paralyzed him. It was the reflection of a woman in a broken mirror. Fragmented, multiple, indecipherable. He remained there, standing still, staring at the image, until Olivia approached and held his hand. He didn't say anything, but she understood. It wasn't about the woman in the photo. It was about everything that image evoked, the versions we keep of who we were, who we loved, and who we hurt, sometimes unintentionally, sometimes because we didn't know how to do it differently. On the way out, they walked through the park in silence. Daniel, after a while, turned to her and asked if she had ever felt like she needed to forgive someone in order to move forward, even without having received an apology. Olivia replied yes. He said that to forgive was not to forget, nor to justify, but to free oneself from the need for revenge. That when we hold on to pain for too long, it begins to shape us, harden us. And that, sometimes, letting go is not a favor to others, but a gift to ourselves. Daniel nodded. He knew that there was nothing more to be done about the past, but there was a lot to be built from now on. And perhaps the real turning point was not the moment when everything collapsed, but the moment we decided not to let the ruin define who we will be after. One Friday afternoon, as he closed the community center where he had been working with Olivia, he found a letter on the table. He had no sender, but he recognized the handwriting. It was Laura's. In the letter, she didn't ask for anything. I didn't try to reopen wounds. She just said that she sincerely hoped that he had found the peace that she, for a long time, didn't know how to give. That he was grateful for everything they had experienced, that he was deeply sorry for everything they destroyed together, and that he wanted him to never stop trusting in love, even if it was someone else, even if it was later. Daniel folded the letter carefully, put it in his pocket and didn't mention it to anyone. It didn't need to. It was already closed. At the end of the day, it wasn't about who won or lost. It was about who managed to keep going, even after being broken. And now he walked with full strides. No rush. No fear. Knowing that love, in the end, is accepting that all stories have cracks, and that, sometimes, what remains is not trying to glue them together, but learning to live with the light that enters through them. Time followed its course with silent obstinacy, as if it made a point of remembering that no pain is permanent and no love is a guarantee of eternity. Daniel, over the months, felt the internal scars lose their initial burning, replaced by a dense maturity, the result of losses, silences, words he didn't say and those he chose to say. He was no longer the same man who walked alongside Laura at corporate parties or who waited awake for her on empty nights. Now there was another kind of presence within him, the awareness that starting over takes courage, but staying broken takes even more. And he chose not to bow to what had destroyed him. He rebuilt himself in silence, through small but consistent actions, rediscovering his ability to love without losing himself in others, and to be whole without needing to be needed by anyone. Olivia, in turn, proved to be more than an emotional shelter. She became a life partner. Not in the classic and romantic sense of someone who merges with the other, but in the most beautiful of senses, someone who walks alongside because they want to, because they respect, because they see. She understood Daniel's silences with the sensitivity of someone in no rush to heal wounds they didn't cause. It was strong, but delicate. Present, but free. And this made the love between them emerge like a river that runs without fuss, but transforms the landscape it passes through. They didn't make immediate plans, they didn't chase a new status or appearances to show the world. They just lived. And it was in this simple way of living that they rediscovered themselves whole. Laura's life took a diametrically opposite direction. After the scandal, she faced a series of internal investigations that, although they did not legally condemn her, destroyed her reputation. Removed from major positions, she was rejected from several interviews and lost the prestige, name and power she valued so much. Former allies disappeared like smoke, and friendly smiles gave way to closed doors and indifferent looks. She tried to start independent consultancies, but the market did not forgive her. The name she built over the years became a reminder of what not to do in the corporate world. The humiliation didn't come in a big event, but in every ignored email, in every meeting where she wasn't invited, in every colleague who looked away when passing her in the corridors. Alone, she moved to a smaller apartment, far from the center. He started to live with the bare minimum. The long days, without meetings or goals, forced her to face herself in a brutal way. For the first time, he had to answer questions he had always avoided. Who was he without work? Who was without the admiring looks? Who was he, in fact, beyond his achievements and titles? What was left after the fall? He began attending therapy sessions, not out of obligation, but out of desperation. I wanted to understand how I had allowed everything to be lost. She discovered, little by little, that the betrayal was not the beginning, but the consequence of previous choices, of internal emptiness that she ignored while feeding on the validation of others. And this process, painful and drawn out, was also the beginning of a silent reconstruction. Not to go back to what he was, but to become, perhaps, someone new. The former director, lover and organizer of the manipulation scheme, was finally removed definitively after deeper investigations. He lost his position, his benefits and, with them, the power he used as a shield and weapon. He tried to take legal action, but the documents provided by Daniel, combined with Laura's confession, ended any possibility of reversal. He was exposed not only as a corrupt manager, but as someone who abused his influence for personal benefit. What was once a self-assured, haughty man became a name remembered with contempt in business circles. He was seen, months later, working discreetly in a small company in the countryside, away from the media, the elite and any trace of influence. Its collapse came not from an explosive scandal but from the slow erosion of a reputation that could no longer be rebuilt. Daniel, on the other hand, expanded the social project alongside Olivia. The community center they had started became a local reference in emotional support and professionalization for people in vulnerable situations. He began to receive visits from universities, social organizations, and journalists. But he refused interviews. I preferred to remain the anonymous man who drank coffee with the participants, who listened to stories without judging, who saw each pain with real empathy. There, he discovered the deepest sense of redemption, not that which is sought in others, but that which is found when we manage to transform our own pain into something useful for the world. The final reunion between Laura and Daniel happened in an unusual way. They were at the same charity event, by chance. He represented the community center, she had been invited by an old contact who was unaware of their past. When they saw each other, they both hesitated. But, with the maturity that time requires, they walked towards each other and exchanged a sincere greeting. It was quick, but full of meaning. There was no more hurt, no desire for reconciliation. There was respect. A silent respect that arises when two people finally understand that everything they experienced was real, but no longer needs to be repeated. Laura wished her luck. Daniel wished for peace. And they followed their paths, this time in opposite directions, but without the weight that held them back. Time passed. The seasons have changed. And life, with its invisible wisdom, put each piece in place. Daniel now walked alongside Olivia on country trails, wrote articles about ethics and emotional reconstruction, and planned to open new community center locations in other regions. He didn't talk about Laura anymore. Not because of forgetfulness, but because the story had finally come to an end. An end without revenge, without reconciliation, but with truth, with justice and, above all, with evolution. And that, perhaps, was the closest thing to peace he could get. Now that you've come this far, tell me in the comments what you thought of this story. Would you have made the same decisions in Daniel's place? Do you believe it is possible to start over with dignity after betrayal? Your opinion is very important. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow other real and impactful stories like this. And remember, here, we do not support any type of betrayal. Every story told aims to show how wrong choices can destroy lives. Until next time.